Took a DNA test with my twin sister just for fun, but it turned out we're not actually related, and now no one in the family wants to tell me the truth about what really happened. My twin and I, both 21F, have always been incredibly close. We rarely fought, always supported each other, and even though we're fraternal twins, it felt like we were two halves of the same whole. A few months ago, our grandparents suggested we take DNA tests, just for fun. They thought it would be cool to see what we inherited from the family. Our grandma often talked about our Croatian roots, and Grandpa loved joking about our German genes. It sounded interesting, so we agreed. Grandpa even paid for both kits. When the results came back, my twin was thrilled. Her DNA was exactly what we expected, 50% Croatian, with some Austrian and German ancestry mixed in. It all lined up perfectly with what we knew about our family. Then I opened my results. At first, I thought there had to be a mistake. None of my ancestry matched hers. No Croatian, no German, no Austrian. Instead, my results showed mostly Scandinavian heritage, with a bit of ancestry from regions that weren't in my twin's report at all. But the most shocking part? We didn't share any DNA. 0 matches. My twin laughed it off. It's definitely a mistake. They must have mixed up your sample with someone else's. Her calm attitude helped me relax a little. We contacted the testing company, and they apologized, offering to retest us for free. We both sent in new samples, making sure to follow every instruction perfectly this time. But when the second set of results came back, they were identical to the first. No shared DNA. No explanation. My twin still tried to reassure me. These tests aren't perfect. There's got to be some kind of error. Maybe the company messed up again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. 2 identical results? That's not just a coincidence. I kept replaying everything in my head. We share the same birthday. We grew up together. There are baby photos of us side by side on the mantle in our parents' house. How could it be possible that we don't share any DNA? We decided to tell our grandparents, hoping they'd take it seriously. But when I told them my results were completely different, they barely reacted. That's interesting, Grandpa said with a shrug. Maybe there's something wrong with the tests, Grandma added. And that was it. No follow-up questions, no concern. They quickly changed the subject. My twin insisted we talk to our parents next. She thought we should gather all the results and see if anyone else in the family had done a DNA test before. I hesitated. I was scared of what their reaction might reveal. But she pushed me, so we sat her mom down. Mom, we need to talk about something, my twin started. Before we even explained, I noticed the worry on Mom's face. When we told her about the DNA results, her response was strange. She sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of shock or concern. It felt more like irritation. Those tests are inaccurate anyway, she said. Your grandparents never should have suggested it. But this isn't just one mistake, I said. We don't share DNA. That's impossible for twins. She waved me off. You're overthinking this. Just let it go, okay? Her reaction confused me even more. Why wasn't she shocked? Why wasn't she asking questions? When we told Dad, his reaction was even worse than Mom's. He barely looked up, just nodded and said, "It doesn't prove anything. Don't worry about it," before going back to whatever he was doing. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation, but my doubts kept growing. If it wasn't a mistake, then what did it mean? Was I adopted? But if I was, why would they adopt a baby the exact same age as my sister? How would that even happen? And if I was adopted, why would they keep it a secret for 18 years? The hardest part was thinking about my sister. If we aren't biologically related, then who is she to me? And who am I to her? After our parents kept avoiding the conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something huge was being hidden from me. My sister still thought I was overreacting, but I couldn't just drop it. One night, when I was home alone, I decided to do something I hadn't thought of before. I called the hospital where my mom had given birth. I remembered the name because she'd always talked about how difficult her labor was. I was nervous making the call, not even sure if they'd give me any info, but I had to try. "Hi," I said, trying to sound calm. "My mom gave birth at your hospital 18 years ago. She had twins. I was wondering if there are any records of that." The woman on the phone was polite and asked for my mom's name and the date. I heard her typing, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. "We have a record for your mom on that date, but it only lists one birth. A single baby girl. Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking. "She had twins, 2 girls." "No, there's only one baby listed," she replied. I hung up, my hands trembling. None of it made sense. That night, I barely slept. Everything I thought I knew about my life suddenly felt wrong. If the hospital records only showed one baby, how did I end up here? I started thinking about small things I'd never really noticed before. Like how my mom always talked about her difficult labor but never mentioned the moment both of us were born. Or how I've always had way fewer baby pictures than my sister. And then there were the differences I used to ignore. My hair is way lighter than anyone else in the family. I'm much taller, and I've always been more athletic. I used to laugh it off as random genetics, but now it felt like something more. The scariest part was the idea of other people finding out. My sister had mentioned the DNA results to her boyfriend, and I begged her not to tell anyone else. She didn't get why I was so upset. It's just a weird mystery, she said. Why are you freaking out so much? But to me, it wasn't just a mystery. It was my entire identity crumbling. I felt like I didn't belong, like my whole life was built on a lie. I even started questioning my own birthday. Was it even mine? Or had I been given someone else's life? After the call with the hospital, I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. The pieces didn't add up, and my family's silence made it worse. It felt like they all knew something I didn't, and I was the only one left in the dark. One night at dinner, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice shaking. We got the results from the second DNA test. They were the same. My mom looked up, but her face showed no surprise, just annoyance. My dad didn't even look at me, continuing to eat like I hadn't said anything. And, my mom finally said, and I called the hospital. I continued, my voice trembling. They only have a record of one birth that day, not twins. This time, my mom slammed her fork down with a sharp clink. Why would you do that? She snapped. Because I need to know the truth. I shot back, my voice breaking. If this is all just some mix-up, tell me. But if it's not, I deserve to know. She stared at me for what felt like forever before glancing at my dad. He didn't even look up. He quietly pushed his plate away and left the room without a word. When my parents refused to give me answers, I knew I had to try someone else, my grandparents. If anyone would tell me the truth, it had to be them. The next day, I went over to their house and sat with them in the kitchen. I didn't waste time beating around the bush. Do you know anything about my birth? I asked directly. The DNA tests say my sister and I aren't related, and the hospital only recorded one birth that day. What's going on? For a split second, I thought they might actually tell me. They exchanged a glance I couldn't ignore. But then my grandma sighed and said, "Don't let those tests mess with your head. They just make life harder. That doesn't explain anything." I snapped. My grandpa jumped in. "What matters is that you grew up in a loving family. Isn't that enough?" I stared at them in disbelief. "So you do know something?" I asked, my voice shaking. Grandma pressed her lips together, and Grandpa just shook his head. "We can't talk about this," he said flatly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what they said, or what they didn't say. It was clear they knew something, and their silence only made it worse. My sister kept telling me to let it go, saying it wasn't worth all this stress. But how could I? The more they avoided the truth, the more convinced I became that something big was being hidden from me. I stayed up most of the night, scouring the internet. I read stories about hospital mix-ups, babies swapped at birth, even cases where families unknowingly raised children who weren't biologically theirs. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but this was my life. I don't know where this is heading, but I know I can't stop now. The truth is out there, and it terrifies me. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. On one side is the life I've always known. On the other is the truth, something that could shatter everything. I need answers, but I'm scared of what they might be. After that talk with my grandparents, I couldn't focus on anything. My sister kept telling me to move on, but I couldn't. Their silence confirmed my worst fears. They knew something they weren't telling me. So, I took the next step. I reached out to an organization that helps people find their biological families. I explained my situation, and they recommended I request my official birth records. When I finally got the copy of my birth certificate, I was expecting answers. Instead, I just ended up with more questions. On my birth certificate, under Mother, my mom's name was there. Seeing that brought a wave of relief, at least for a second. But then I noticed the Father section. It was completely blank. And then something else caught my eye. In the corner of the document, there was a note showing that my registration date was several days after my sister's. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I knew it wasn't nothing. I couldn't keep this bottled up anymore. I waited until I was alone with my mom, then walked into the kitchen and placed the birth certificate on the table in front of her. "I know something happened," I said, my voice shaking. "This says I wasn't registered the same day as my sister. And there's no father listed. I need you to tell me the truth." She stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it again. But then she let out a long sigh and whispered, "You deserve to know, but I didn't want you to find out like this." Her words hit me like a truck. I braced myself for what was coming. "You weren't born from me," she finally admitted. "But we didn't want you to ever feel different, so we raised you as our own." I couldn't even respond. I just sat there in shock, waiting for her to explain. She told me that when she gave birth to my sister, there had been a tragedy. My sister was originally a twin, but her twin didn't survive. And in the same hospital, there was another newborn, a baby girl whose parents weren't able to take care of her. That baby was me. I still don't know how to fully process this. Part of me is grateful. My parents gave me a loving home and a family when I could have had nothing. But another part of me feels like my entire life has been built on a lie. When I told my sister, she hugged me and said, "You're still my sister. That hasn't changed. We grew up together. We're family, no matter what." Her words helped, but they didn't erase the storm of emotions inside me. Now, I'm left wondering, should I try to find my biological parents? What if I do and regret it? Or what if they don't want to be found? For now, I'm just taking it day by day. My mom and I are starting to have more honest conversations, but it's hard. Every time I look at my family, I question how much of what I know about myself is real. But here's the one thing I do know. No matter where I came from, the people who raised me are my family. And that has to mean something. Update. A lot has happened since I first found out the truth, and it's been intense, to say the least. I didn't expect my entire world to flip upside down so quickly, and honestly, I'm still trying to process it all. After my mom admitted the truth about my adoption, I thought I'd feel some kind of closure. But instead, I just felt more lost. The idea that I wasn't biologically related to the people I've called my family for 21 years, it was like my entire identity shattered overnight. My mom and I had a few long, emotional talks in the days after her confession. She told me everything she could about the day I was born, but it wasn't much. She said the adoption was handled quietly because my biological parents wanted no contact. They were young, overwhelmed, and my mom and dad happened to be in the right place at the right time. But here's where things started feeling off. When I asked for more details about my biological parents, like their names or where they were from, my mom hesitated. She told me she didn't have that information. I couldn't help but feel like the adoption wasn't as simple as she was making it seem. I tried asking my dad, but he was even more distant. He keeps telling me he did what was best for the family and doesn't want to dwell on the past. Every time I bring it up, it's like he just shuts down completely. My sister has been my biggest support through all of this, but I can tell it's been hard on her too. We've always seen ourselves as twins equals. But now, we're stuck in this strange in-between where we're not actually related by blood. We've had a few emotional conversations. She told me she's scared this will change things between us. I told her it wouldn't. How could it? We grew up together. We shared every birthday, every holiday, every inside joke. That's not something biology can erase. But then she told her boyfriend about everything, and now I'm worried that this family secret might not stay a secret much longer. I get it. She needed someone to talk to. But I can't help but feel anxious about how people will see me if they find out I'm not really part of the family. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't leave things as they were. I needed to know where I came from. Even if my biological parents didn't want contact back then, maybe things are different now. I called the hospital again, hoping they'd have more information about my adoption. But they told me they couldn't release any further details without legal authorization. That's when I realized this was going to be way more complicated than I thought. Now, I'm looking into hiring a lawyer to help me get access to those records. I'm also considering taking another DNA test with a company that specializes in connecting people with biological relatives. It's terrifying. What if I find something I'm not ready to know? But I can't stop wondering. Emotionally, it's been overwhelming. I've started journaling just to keep my thoughts straight. Some days, I feel grateful for the life I have and the family that raised me. Other days, I feel completely lost, like I'm floating in this weird limbo where I don't fully belong anywhere. My mom's been checking in on me a lot. I can tell she's trying. She's apologized more than once for not telling me sooner, and I believe she really thought she was protecting me. But it's going to take time to process all of this. Through it all, my sister has been my anchor. She keeps reminding me that no matter what, I'm still her sister. That hasn't changed, and it never will. I hold on to that whenever I start spiraling. For now, I'm focusing on taking things one step at a time. I've started researching how to access adoption records and looking into therapy to help work through all these emotions. I'm not ready to reach out to potential biological relatives yet, but it's something I'm considering down the road. This whole experience has been a whirlwind, but it's also shown me just how strong the bond with my family really is. Even though I'm not biologically related to them, they're still my family. And my sister? She'll always be my sister. That's one thing I'm sure of.